Welcome to the most important week of the year for the podcast industry. Welcome to Podcast Movement 2025.
Good morning. My name is Lindsay Graham. I am the host of several podcasts, American History Tellers, American Scandal, History Daily. But for the purposes of today, I am also the composer of all the music on those shows. And that's what I'm talking to you about today. I am also the founder of Thrumm, a music resource for podcasters. But we're not talking about that. Everything I discuss today is applicable to any piece of music, hopefully. And we're here to learn about cinematic audio techniques for the use of music in podcasts. The first question I'd like to pose, I guess, is what are we trying to do with music at all in podcasts? I don't know which your podcasts, and there are many different types. But we're talking about the use of music in podcasts that is far beyond the intro, outro, theme songs, the bumpers, right? This is to use music in a way that augments or changes or adds to the meaning of the text, right? So music is in its own right an art form. We listen and consume and enjoy it by itself. But in conjunction with another media, it becomes something else. We're going to try and talk about that. What we're essentially doing is trying to layer context into something, spoken word, right? Why would we even want to do that in the first place? We're very accustomed to hearing people talk without a soundtrack. So what is the added benefit? We're trying to reinforce a point. We're trying to contrast, add nuance. We're trying to punctuate something, or we're trying to emote, further bring more emotion to a moment. We can do that if we think, in terms of conveying an emotion, with music. I'd invite you to think about your use of music as an actor does or a director does when they make choices in a scene. There's a lot of music you could use for any one purpose, but if you're probably familiar with the process that an actor might go through and how big a moment he or she may want to make a scene, how small, where the emotion is centered. It could be in the face, it could be in the gesture, right? All of these things are analogs for how you can also use music in your spoken word project and make it very deliberate and convey extra meaning and context through your choices. I'd also like you to think about music in its narrative purpose. Generally, there are like four modalities of narrative purpose, what you are doing in your story. You are explaining things. It's exposition, right? You are building suspense. You're leading up to something. You are releasing that suspense in a resolution of sort, or you are accelerating or changing the pace. That could be a slowing up or a speeding down. All of these things you are doing in your storytelling, and all of these things music does too in its own way. And you can use those complementary factors of music to assist and augment and elevate your storytelling. I think that's what we're trying to accomplish with the use of music in a podcast. But let's talk about some specifics. In general, I'm not going to try and get into too much audio engineer speak or musician speak, but this is one section that I will be a little technical. Sound is a physical and physiological thing, right? Our voices inhabit a certain frequency range. Our ears are tuned to pick up those certain frequencies, so intelligibility is paramount. Those frequencies are fundamentally, there's some debate about this, but between 1.5 kilohertz and 4,000 kilohertz, 4,000 hertz, excuse me. This is a critical area in the bandwidth for intelligibility, and music often will occupy the exact same frequency space. When you're using music in a podcast, you will start chewing into the space, the frequency space that you should be reserving for the human voice. It is critical that when you're auditioning and selecting music, you have a thought of where is the power of this music. Is it in the upper mid-range where we hear things? Is there a percussion track that is right where all the consonants are, right around 4,000 hertz? And you need to be technically aware of what information you are adding, because that is not adding information, it's really masking information that you're trying to actually elevate, right? The spoken word. Also, in terms of room, when you are thinking about music and selecting music, when we listen to music, especially modern pop music, it's often very dense. There's a lot of stuff in there. Instrumentation, arrangements, a lot of sound. That is obviously not exactly the best thing to do when you've got a limited amount of sound to work with in your podcast. Sparse arrangements, smaller things can not only be more evocative, but are technically easier to manage in a larger mix, right? And also remember that music, and I'll get back to this, is a rhythmic art as well. The timing of how you lay your music in conjunction with your spoken word can mean a lot. If you have a beat or a downbeat or a percussive element that happens to coincide with an important consonant or a word with emphasis, you could be undermining your entire narrative purpose by masking that with the music. A simple nudge, a few microseconds off that important consonant or emphasis will change the entire thing. That's kind of the most technical I'm going to get. I'd be glad to talk about that more. I can talk about it all day. But instead, I want to talk about the theory of using music cinematically. And cinematically is a word that I want to underline here. We're talking about the use of music throughout or through a majority of your project, as a score, as an underscore, right? And this means that there's a lot of music, and so you have a lot of music selection, a lot of music editing, and a lot of choices to make to keep this going. In some of my shows, American Scandal is a good example. That is wall-to-wall music. There's 45 minutes of underscore every week in those episodes, right? So there's a lot of choices. How do we do it? The most important thing probably to think about technically when you're managing music in an underscore setting is knowing that the transitions are paramount. Ins, outs, and throughs, okay? Any audience is going to get inured or very used to a piece of music. You're going to set a mood by starting a piece of music, and it will continue. And your audience will forget about it. It's still doing its job. It's, giving an emotion. But the minute it changes, that is a piece of information, that is a piece of meaning that you are handing your audience. It could change to another piece of music. It could change in instrumentation. Some new thing could happen in the same piece of music. But there's a transition, and that transition is going to be as important in the moment to the subconscious listener's mind, that as important as the actual text that you're trying to narrate. These transitions then should be either conspicuous and chosen well, or inconspicuous, because you don't want the listener to clue into some extra information that you don't intend, right? So, what are conspicuous transitions? This would be, the most obvious one would be the Law and Order dun-dun, right? A big hit that indicates this thing is over and we are moving on. Most music doesn't end that way. Doesn't have those sorts of hits. You can manufacture them, but also I'll kind of talk about this a little later. I would try and steer you away from the big hit. This is the most easy, obvious choice you can make. It's an exclamation point at the end of your sentence, and not all sentences require an exclamation point. Instead, what we do often is kind of a dissolve, right? And this is can be accomplished in audio editing really easily. You could fade out, right? Radio songs have been doing this forever. It just fades out, goes away. I find that conspicuous as well, because it's not changing enough. It is getting distant from you if you just fade out. The thing that you were listening to is suddenly going away in space. Instead, you want to change the space. And how do you change the space in audio? Well, one of the most effective ways would be to use a reverb, right? So we have on a send track of almost all of our projects, a reverb that we selected that is rather dark, but not too dark. So what I mean by that is it's got the highs cut off and the lows cut off. This is a kind of a mid-range wash. It's very long reverb, and a reverb is the reverberation in a large room. Think of a cathedral, right? And what we will do is, as we are simultaneously fading out from a music cue, we want to give the impression that it's not just moving away from us, but it is disappearing, right? And we do that by, as we fade out, we feed to this reverb in a kind of a contrary motion. This presents this effect of just dissolving into the air. It has no real finality to it. It's kind of a suspense. And that is probably our number one technique for getting out of a piece of music. We will use it as we transition into different pieces of music. Instead of a straight crossfade, right? You might do that as well, like crossfade from one piece of music into another. That, again, is a very familiar thing to anyone who's listened to the radio at all in their life. And it conveys a meaning of a switch. It is a thing that people are accustomed to, and they will know you are moving from this thing to that thing. And that will be a piece of information you may not be intending to give them. So instead of crossfades, we will often do this dissolve into reverb and then a slow fade up, which is a little extra time than a straight crossfade. But it accomplishes this disappearing act, which I'm trying to do in my music editing, so that I do not put a bump in the road in my listener's experience. Talking too long, my laptop turned off. The other thing that you're going to find out in any use of music is that you will end up talking longer than the music lasts. You will need to extend or somehow augment the piece of music you're interested in. Sometimes the piece of music you're interested in, you really like, is just like, I don't know, the first verse or the second chorus, and the rest of the song you chose you don't like for this purpose. So what do you do when you've got 20 seconds of music that you want to use over 2 minutes of dialogue? All right, well, 20 seconds into 2 minutes is that's a trick. But you will do a few things. The very first thing you could do is just loop it, right? You can repeat the piece of music. Choose your edit points and repeat it. Some quick, clever editing, there's no problem there. However, audiences will immediately cue in to the repetition. That's okay. If you think of pop songs, they're built on repetition, right? So we're accustomed to that, where it's okay with it. But I would say if you loop a piece of music, they will say, it's the same piece of music. I've set up a mood or a motif even, right? If you loop 3 times, now I'm just repeating myself. There's like a big difference in the audience's ears between hearing something twice and hearing something 3 times. However, if you were to do something clever, and imitate like a pop song form, you could repeat something twice, bring in something new, and then go back to the original piece, right? This is the verse, chorus pattern that we're all very familiar with. And it's one suggestion to take, instead of just loop, find a complementary but different piece that resets your audience's ear that we're already accustomed to in a manner we're already accustomed to. And then you can go back to the original piece and start looping. So hopefully, if we do that, right, we had our 20 seconds, we're trying to get to 2 minutes, we could just loop it. That's 40 seconds. We're not there. Find another piece that's 15 seconds, and then go back to the first piece, all right? So that's 20, 60 seconds plus this 15 piece. We're really close, right, just with that one trick. If you find music, and you are lucky enough to find music with various mixes, like alternate mixes or reduced mixes, or provides the stems, now you have a toolkit to do this looping and augmentation with much more sophistication. What are stems, just to be clear here? So a piece of music is made of instruments, right? Or different pieces of sound. Oftentimes, if you get music from a production library, they will provide you with the pieces of music, the stems, like the bass track or the piano track, in isolation that were used to build the overall piece of music. These are fantastic for you if you start thinking as a composer rather than just an editor, because now you have the components of the piece of music you like to suggest, to do variations and repeat motifs. Let's say there's a piece of music and it has a light piano melody, right? And you've now begun associating that piece of music with a certain character in your narrative. If you were custom composing your score, you would tell your composer, hey, that melody is now the motif for that character. Bring it back whenever you can so the audience knows, this is what we're talking about, right? If you had the stem of that melody, you can now use it in isolation to just barely suggest. You can mix it in and out of the piece of music you picked it from to make it bigger or less, right? More obvious. Or you could use that stem in other pieces of music. We have an amazing ability now, and even more so every day with AI tools, to change the timing and change the pitch of any piece of audio musically, and pretty well. So what I've done before with great success is to start thinking like a composer, use these stems, steal a piece, a stem from one piece of music, and insert it in another piece of music. I might have to change the key, to make it match. You can do that by ear, right? You just click up and find out where it fits. Or if you're more musically inclined, you might know a little faster. And then you probably have to change the timing of it to meet the meter of the new piece of music. But I mean, imagine what you've just done. You've taken two needle drop canned pieces of music and think about all the information you've added to the narrative by taking a stem, by combining these pieces of music and using them in a manner that is much more cinematic. Even before cinema, right? We're talking about classical motifs and their association with characters. Another thing that we do that I don't see too many other people do is play not just with reverb, but with much more destructive effects, right? So this could be distortion or delays or filters that drastically alter the character of the piece of music. The composer of that music may not like what you do to it, but you don't care. You're trying to change it to fit your narrative purposes. So a quick example would be, we've all heard the telephone effect, right, on a piece of music or a vocal. It gets smaller, it feels distant, but it also feels kind of more urgent. That's a very emotion-forward effect that you could apply not just on your vocals, but on a piece of music, to not make it sound like it comes out of a telephone, but to make it distant, to make it aggressive, to make it something else. And you don't have to use the entire effect. You can mix it in with an unaffected version and automate the change. Like we start with the regular piece of music and then slowly over the piece of of your narrative, the music changes in tone and timbre. It doesn't change, the music itself doesn't change, but suddenly it's distorted, or suddenly it's really echo, and not even suddenly, but gradually, let's say. And you are pulling the rug out from under your listener. You're changing the information, the context of this piece of music. So I would encourage you to be as creative as possible with certain effects. If you want to keep this piece of music, but there's a change in your emotion, well, maybe you don't need a new piece of music. Maybe you could just change the music itself, the tone of it. I want to get to, gosh, the time goes by so fast. I want to get to timing, right? There's three parts of music. There's melody, there's harmony, and there's rhythm. And I would say there's definitely melody and rhythm in the human voice. We don't often talk in multiple tones. It's hard to be harmonious with yourself in a single voice. But I want you to remember the rhythm part of it. When you are editing any piece of music, keep the tempo in mind. This will inform your transitions, your ins and outs. It will also inform the pace of your narration. Hopefully, if you've been doing this for a while, you will notice that your naked first cut dialogue only edit on the narration has a certain pace to it, and then you lay in the music and something is wrong. You may not know what that something is, but what it probably is the pace is wrong between the piece of music and the narration. So either you need to find a different piece of music, or you need to adjust the pace of your narration. Most of that pace is felt in the spaces, is felt in the pauses and breaks in between words, sentences, and paragraphs. So you don't have to do a whole bunch of editing to change the pace of a narration. But start feeling the beat of the music you chose. And when we come to an end of a sentence, that beat continues. When does the next sentence start? Up again. It probably starts on a 4 or an 8. When, if you're starting a new paragraph, it might be on a 8 or 16 beat, depending on how much space in between the topics we want to do. But you will feel this once you cue in to the tempo of the music you've chosen, and you will see how important it is to match up the tempo of your narration. Now, matching tempo doesn't mean putting it exactly on the beat. And in fact, some of the most interesting music is syncopated, right? It doesn't have a steady pulse or the accents are on the upbeats. This is very interesting too, because a steady pulse is constant and predictable. Syncopation is unpredictable. It's unresolved. And oftentimes that's what we're trying to tell, in our stories. So I would say, okay, if you got the feel of the tempo and you're editing and you need to get out of a piece, out of a paragraph in which you want the listener to feel that it's not complete, the story's continuing, that there's something more, choose an upbeat. So we're going to stop and finish right here, right? The beat, half beat before that last downbeat. You will get used to this, even if you're not intensely musical, but just start thinking about it. And then where the obvious thing is, choose a different one. But it will probably be on a subdivision of the beat, which we call an offbeat, and it does wonders. Tiny little timing changes. And avoid the big downbeat. It's the big downbeat is the 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, right? And you will start and end a lot of songs that way, but it is so obvious. It is the Law and Order dun-dun. It's movie trailer music. You are more sophisticated and nuanced in your storytelling. Try to avoid the obvious downbeat, right? Another thing I'd like to suggest you do, and maybe we'll get 5 minutes of time for questions, is do the opposite. Okay? One of the beautiful things about music is it has no inherent meaning in it. It is not language, but it is a motive. And so we can bring a whole new sense of irony, of contrast, of complexity by doing things that are opposite to what may be ordinary or normal, right? Horror films do this all the time. A tiny, what would be, like children's toy piano playing a small nursery rhyme in the context of a grisly murder is, a choice of the opposite. You have the opportunity to explore an entire world of nuance by not doing what you first thought you should do. You can go quiet when things are getting loud in your story. You can drop out all the information and find a drone that has no real change or meaning or melody when things are really interesting in your story. You can go for a pulse when things are slowing down in your story. Imagine a situation in which your protagonist is exploring an especially emotive moment, and instead of going for a light or an uplifting or soaring melody that might accompany, you think about the strings that are underneath this positive moment or strong emotion, you go for something that is much more rhythmic and changes the pace of this thing. I'm not telling your stories, but there's an entire world of choice and opportunity if you remember just like, hey, is this a place where I could do the opposite? Instead of the piece of music that was easy to find and immediately works, what's the harder choice? All right, I've got 4 minutes and 20 seconds. I would love to answer your questions. That was super fast. Do any of you have questions? Wait for the mic.
Hi, I had a question about time. So I want to incorporate more music into my podcast,
Yeah.
but it requires a lot of time in editing and doing that. Do you have any tips on how to kind of make it a little more efficient?
Well, I was told I shouldn't sell my music library, so I'm not going to do that. But there are obviously some, one of the problems with music is finding the right music. I like to say that searching for music is like dancing for architecture. It doesn't work. You will try and find keywords, and you'll get thousands of results. And so there are certain libraries that do narrative documentary work well. And and then within those libraries, or even the larger ones, there are certain composers that do this sort of stuff well. So once you begin finding them, dig into, constrain yourself is actually what I'm saying. Instead of looking for the biggest production library out there, which really caters for short form video, loud, fast moving stuff, try and find the other sources and stick with it. Another thing to do is like I suggest, don't go looking for a different piece of music every 20 seconds. See how you can repurpose things. How can you be creative and build a score with meaning from your more limited palette?
Hi, hugely helpful talk, first of all, but maybe there's no way to answer this, but when it comes to genre,
Yeah.
sometimes I find myself trying to think of the target, think of what I like, and it kind of becomes a mix of that. But how do I pick the right genre song for this moment?
That's tough, right? Your narrative will live in its own genre, appropriate space, and sometimes, like in a Tarantino film, you might borrow outside of that space to provide contrast or context. But picking the music is really a subjective thing. What I would suggest to you, though, is lean into the happy accidents. You will be surprised at how wonderfully some things just work against all your expectations. Seriously, download 20 pieces of music, pick them at random, throw them in, and then see what happened. All right, did it work? Okay, great, you're done. Did it not work? Well, you got more work to do, but now you have reasons why and knowledge about why that didn't work. If you were analytical about it, it's the tempo's wrong, the genre's wrong, the feeling's wrong. But ask yourself a few more questions underneath that to find out why it's wrong, and that will probably guide you to the next better piece of music. Okay, thank you so much. I'll be around here for a little bit if you have additional questions you'd like to ask. I hope you have a wonderful podcast movement.